The air in the room tasted like victory and expensive champagne, thick and sweet and suffocating. It wasn't my victory. It was hers. My sister, standing under the spotlight, her smile blinding, accepting the applause, the title, the future. My husband stood beside me, his hand a dead weight on my lower back, a public show of support that felt like a cage. The noise of the party washed over me, a tide of congratulations and forced laughter. I smiled too, a fixed, brittle thing. I caught his eye, looking for a shared moment, a flicker of pride for my family, maybe even for me, for simply being there, holding it together. His gaze was distant, fixed on the stage, on her. Then he leaned down, his breath warm against my ear, the words a slow, deliberate poison dripping into my soul. He didn't shout, didn't even raise his voice above the celebratory din. He whispered it. Just 5 words. You'll never, ever be her. His voice was low, almost conversational, but the sound echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence that opened inside me. The champagne bubbles in my glass felt like acid. The music faded, the faces around me blurred. Only his words remained, hanging in the air between us, invisible to everyone else, a razor wire slicing through everything I thought I knew. You'll never, ever be her. It wasn't just a comparison. It was a verdict. A dismissal. A condemnation. My chest tightened, a physical ache spreading outwards. The room spun, but I held myself still, anchored by the sheer force of the betrayal. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a partner, but a stranger. A judge. A man who saw my core, my effort, my quiet dreams, and found them utterly, irrevocably lacking. The party roared on, oblivious. My sister glowed on stage. And I stood frozen, the whispered sentence echoing, changing everything. If this story hits close to home, if you've ever felt a moment like that slice through your life, tell me about it in the comments. I read all of them. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe. It helps me more than you know bring these stories to life. Before that night, my life felt manageable, stable, predictable. I lived in a comfortable house that was maybe a little too quiet. I had a job that paid the bills and offered decent benefits. It wasn't a career that set the world on fire, but it was solid, reliable. I worked in procurement for a large, old-school manufacturing company. We made components. Essential, unglamorous components that kept bigger, flashier machines running. My days were filled with spreadsheets, supplier negotiations, ensuring deadlines were met, costs were contained. It required meticulous attention to detail, patience, a knack for forecasting trends, and spotting inefficiencies. Skills I was good at. Skills no one ever threw parties for. My sister, Clara, was different. Always had been. Brighter, louder, more effortless. We weren't estranged, not exactly, but our paths had diverged early. She was creative, charismatic, destined for the spotlight she now stood in. I was the steady one, the planner, the one who made sure the trains ran on time while she was out building the railway itself. Growing up, the comparisons were subtle, sometimes even kind. She's the artist, you're the engineer. She's the dreamer, you're the doer. Later, they became sharper. She's building an empire, you're keeping the lights on. My marriage to David felt, for a long time, like my anchor in a world that seemed to favor Clara's kind of brilliance. He was steady, charming in a quiet way. We had met at a friend's low-key dinner party. He worked in finance, understood numbers, appreciated structure. He seemed to see me, not just in relation to my sister, but as my own person. He admired my practicality, he said. My grounded nature. It felt like finally, someone saw value in the bedrock, not just the glittering skyscraper. We built a life that was comfortable, predictable. Weekends involved quiet dinners, maybe a movie, visits to family. We talked about renovations, retirement plans, mundane, comfortable things. The absence of grand passion felt, to me, like peace. Security. There were small cracks, looking back. His occasional dismissiveness of my work. The way his eyes would glaze over when I talked about a complex negotiation I'd navigated successfully. his fascination with Clara's rapid ascent in the tech world. He'd follow her company's progress with an intensity he never applied to mine. He'd praise her risk-taking, her vision, her ability to seemingly conjure success out of thin air. I'd brush it off. Siblings are different. Partners have different interests. It was just noise. The comfortable routine, the shared history, the feeling of being chosen by him, overshadowed these small, disquieting moments. I convinced myself this was what stability looked like. This was enough. Then came the promotion party. Clara had climbed the ladder at her disruptive tech startup at dizzying speed. Head of strategy. At 35. The party wasn't just a celebration. It was an announcement to the world. A statement of her power, her trajectory. David insisted we go. He was genuinely proud of her, he said. And I wanted to be there for my sister. I put on a dress I felt good in, practiced my congratulatory smile. I told myself to push away the familiar, faint pang of comparison that always surfaced around Clara. Tonight was about her. I could handle one night. But standing there, the weight of his hand on my back, the distance in his eyes as he watched her, the carefully delivered cruelty of his whisper, it didn't just sting. It detonated. It wasn't about Clara. It was about him. His perception of me. His judgment. The comfortable life we had built suddenly felt like a beautifully furnished prison cell. The bars were the predictability, the lack of passion, the quiet dismissal I had normalized. His words weren't just a comparison to my sister. They were a summation of how he saw me. Small. Incapable of greatness. Forever in the shadow. The party became a blur of noise and light. I remember nodding, smiling, offering congratulations that felt hollow, my voice thin and reedy. David stayed by my side, playing the part of the supportive husband. But every touch, every shared glance, felt like a lie now. His hand on my arm felt like a brand. His smile felt like a mask. I wanted to run, to scream, to shatter the expensive champagne flutes and the carefully constructed facade of my life. But I stood there, frozen, letting the waves of betrayal wash over me. The air conditioning was too cold, the music too loud. My smile ached. My eyes felt dry and hot. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake beside him, the space between us a chasm. His breathing was slow, steady, the sound of someone at peace. I felt like I was drowning in turbulence. I replayed his words. You'll never, ever be her, the casual cruelty of it. The certainty. It wasn't born of anger or a fight. It was a quiet, confident statement of fact, as if he were commenting on the weather. That was the deepest cut. It wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a deeply held belief. He didn't believe in me. Not in my potential, not in my capacity for more than what I was. The first few weeks were a haze of disbelief and pain. I tried to talk to him, to explain how much his words had hurt me, to understand why he would say something so devastating. He was dismissive. Oh, come on, he'd say, waving a hand. Don't be so sensitive. It was just an observation. Clara's on a different trajectory. It's not a big deal. He'd accuse me of overreacting, of looking for drama. He couldn't grasp, or refused to grasp, that the wound wasn't the comparison itself, but the source. It came from him, my partner, the person who was supposed to be my strongest advocate. His inability or unwillingness to see the depth of the hurt twisted the knife. It wasn't just a careless comment. It was a window into his soul, and what I saw there was a fundamental lack of respect. The marriage became a performance. We moved through the motions of our life together, but the connection was severed. The comfortable silence became heavy, filled with unspoken accusations and resentments. Every interaction felt strained. He'd talk about Clara's company, her latest achievements, his voice full of genuine admiration. And each word was a fresh reminder of his verdict on me. I started withdrawing. I stopped sharing details about my day. I ate dinner in silence, lost in my own thoughts. The house felt cold, empty, despite being filled with our things. His presence was no longer comforting, but suffocating. At work, I felt the ripple effect. The mundane tasks felt even more mundane. The spreadsheets blurred. The negotiations felt pointless. What was the point of being good at this quiet, steady work if the person whose opinion mattered most saw it as inherently inferior? Doubt started to creep in. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just average. Maybe I lacked that spark, that ambition, that innate ability to shine that Clara had in spades. I'd look around my office, at the beige walls, the flickering fluorescent lights, and feel a crushing sense of mediocrity. This was it, wasn't it? This steady, unremarkable existence. This was my ceiling. I tried, half-heartedly at first, to push against the feeling. I looked at job postings in more exciting industries. But the descriptions felt intimidating. They wanted go-getters, innovators, people with flashy achievements. My resume felt thin, lacking. The confidence that had been quietly chipped away for years and violently shattered by David's words wasn't there. I felt stuck, trapped in a life, a job, a marriage that suddenly felt too small, too stifling. The comparison to Clara, which had always been external, now burrowed deep inside, becoming the relentless voice of my own self-doubt. The quiet suffering morphed into a simmering resentment. Resentment towards David for his cruelty, his blindness. Resentment towards Clara, unfairly, for simply being the person he wished I was. The unfairness of it all gnawed at me. Why did I have to carry this weight? Why did his insecurity or disappointment become my burden? I found myself replaying not just his words, but moments from our entire relationship, seeing them through this new, darker lens. His subtle digs, his lack of interest in my successes, his easy praise for others. It wasn't sudden. It had been building, a slow erosion I hadn't recognized until the structure collapsed. One evening, months after the party, David came home buzzing with excitement. Clara's company was expanding. They were looking for investment, planning a major acquisition themselves. He was talking about potentially getting involved, maybe leveraging some of his contacts, maybe even joining their board someday. His eyes shone with a reflected glory. He paced the living room, talking animatedly about market share, disruptive technology, valuation. He didn't notice I was silent, watching him from the sofa, a growing coldness spreading through my chest. He stopped, finally, and looked at me, a performative smile on his face. Isn't that incredible? Clara's really built something, hasn't she? I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He didn't need my answer. He was talking to himself, lost in the fantasy of being associated with her success. He was building his future on her foundation. A foundation he clearly believed was infinitely more solid and impressive than anything I could ever build. He didn't see the irony. He didn't see me. Not really. Just a quiet fixture in the background of his much more interesting life, which now included being linked to his brilliant sister's brilliant company. That night was the turning point. Listening to him talk about Clara's company, about their plans, their future, while completely disregarding mine, something inside me shifted. The pain didn't vanish, but the raw, bleeding wound began to scab over, hardening into something cold and resolute. The self-doubt didn't disappear, but it was overlaid by a fierce, quiet anger. "You'll never, ever be her," he had whispered. The words echoed again, but this time, they didn't sound like a verdict. They sounded like a challenge. And challenges, I suddenly realized, were things I was good at. My job, my quiet, unglamorous job, was built on navigating challenges, on finding leverage others missed, on understanding systems and structures. He saw me as small, contained, limited to my quiet corner of the world. He saw Clara as the disruptor, the one who built empires. He was so focused on the kind of success he understood, the tech boom, the flashy IPOs, the kind of thing you read about in magazines, that he was blind to other forms of power. Blind to the quiet strength of a company that had been a bedrock for decades. Blind to the skills of someone who understood the nuts and bolts, the supply chains, the real-world operations that even the flashiest tech relied on. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but it wasn't pain this time. It was clarity. He was trying to cage me in his low expectations. But the cage wasn't locked from the outside. I had been holding the key myself, believing his narrative, believing my own perceived limitations. But what if I didn't have to be her? What if I could be something else? Something he couldn't even conceive of. I started working late. Not for my regular job, not at first. I stayed in the quiet office after everyone left, or came in on weekends when the building was a silent tomb. I used my access to company databases, to industry reports, to financial analysis tools that were standard issue in my procurement role, but that David likely dismissed as boring back-office tools. I started researching Clara's company. Not just the headlines David devoured, but the fundamentals. Their supply chain. Their manufacturing partners, did they have any? Tech companies sometimes outsourced heavily. Their operational costs. Their market vulnerabilities. My job, the one he found so unremarkable, had given me a deep understanding of how companies actually function, where their hidden costs lie, where they are exposed. Clara's company was brilliant at innovation, at marketing, at capturing market share. But were they built on a solid operational foundation? Were their costs sustainable? Were they dependent on suppliers who held all the power? Did they have blind spots because their focus was entirely on the next big thing? My research became an obsession. It was a secret life lived entirely within my own head and on encrypted files on my work computer. I learned about their key suppliers, many of whom were clients of my own company. I learned about their logistical challenges. I learned about a quiet, but significant, pending regulatory change that could impact their core operations unless they adapted quickly and expensively. I started to see patterns, connections, weaknesses that weren't visible from the outside, certainly not from David's high-level financial perspective. The thought, at first, was just a flicker. A dark, delicious impossibility. What if? What if my quiet, bedrock company, the one that made the unglamorous but essential components, could leverage its stability, its deep industry connections, its sheer financial weight, against a faster, flashier, but perhaps less fundamentally sound startup? I began to structure the information, building a case. A strategic case for acquisition. Not for revenge, not directly, though the thought of David's face made the air crackle, but a genuine, financially sound, strategically brilliant case for why acquiring Clara's company would be a smart move for my own. They had the innovation, the market presence, the glamour. My company had the infrastructure, the financial reserves, the deep operational expertise. It could be a synergy, a powerful one. But it was also a potential weapon. A way to utterly dismantle the narrative David had built. A way to prove him wrong on a scale he couldn't possibly comprehend. You'll never, ever be her. Maybe not. Maybe I would be the one who owned where she worked. The idea took root, growing in the darkness of my secret, like a strange, powerful flower pushing through concrete. The deeper I got into the research, the more I saw the potential. And the more I saw the risks. This wasn't just about making a case. This was about navigating the labyrinthine politics of my own large corporation. It meant getting the attention of people who usually only saw me as a name on a report. It meant convincing them that a flashy tech startup was a worthwhile target, not just a risky gamble. It meant putting myself, my reputation, potentially my entire career on the line. If I failed, if the proposal was dismissed, I would be exposed. The quiet, competent employee would become the one who overreached, who had strange, perhaps inappropriate, obsessions with another company, especially one her sister worked at. The professional humiliation would be immense. And there was the marriage. Or what was left of it. David noticed I was distant, preoccupied. He attributed it, I think, to depression over his comment or my sister's success. He offered patronizing comfort sometimes. Look, I know it's hard seeing Clara fly so high when you're comfortable, but there's nothing wrong with a comfortable life. Each word was like sandpaper against my skin. I just nodded, keeping my eyes down, letting him believe he understood. It was easier this way. It gave me cover. He started spending more time with Clara, talking business, attending industry events with her. He was positioning himself, I realized, networking, building connections, making himself indispensable to her world. He saw his future tied to hers. He talked about potential roles, potential investments, the doors her success was opening for him. He was so consumed by the reflected light that he was utterly blind to the storm gathering in my quiet corner. The crisis deepened as my plan matured. I had identified key players in my company's executive structure who might be receptive to an unconventional idea, people who understood the need for diversification, who saw the potential in marrying our old money stability with new money innovation. But they were powerful, busy people. Getting a meeting, let alone getting them to take my proposal seriously, felt impossible. My attempts to network internally felt clumsy, forced. I was outside my element. My comfort zone was spreadsheets and contracts, not boardroom politics. Financially, I started diverting every spare dollar. Consultants weren't an option, too risky, too public. I relied on my own research, my own analysis. But if I needed external validation, if I needed to fly somewhere for a discreet meeting, if I needed to pull strings, it would cost. And my savings were modest. David controlled most of our joint finances, or at least was more aware of them. Any unusual spending would be noticed. I opened a separate, secret bank account. It felt illicit, another layer of the life I was building entirely in the shadows. The tension at home was a constant low hum. We rarely fought, but the air crackled with unspoken words. He was excited about his burgeoning connections in Clara's world. I was terrified and exhilarated by the secret world I was building to potentially consume it. We were two ships passing in the night, except one was a small, unassuming freighter, and the other was a luxury liner oblivious to the fact that the freighter was secretly loading torpedoes. One evening, David told me he was considering leaving his current finance job. He'd been offered a consulting gig specifically to help Clara's company with their upcoming acquisition plans. He was ecstatic. This was it, he said. His chance to really be part of something big, something innovative. He talked about how this would elevate our status, our future. He used the word our, but his eyes were miles away, in Clara's glittering world. He asked for my opinion, but it was pro forma. He'd already made up his mind. He was tethering his future directly to his sister's success. He was walking, blindfolded, directly into the path of the wave I was building. This was the moment. His decision solidified my own. There was no going back now. He was doubling down on his belief in her trajectory and his dismissal of mine. He was making himself vulnerable, tying his fate to the very entity I was targeting. It wasn't just opportunity knocking, it was fate clearing the path. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. My research was thorough. The strategic case was sound. The potential synergies were real. The regulatory vulnerability of Clara's company was a ticking clock that made them a more attractive target now than they would be once they were forced to address it. I had identified the executive most likely to champion the idea, a pragmatic, results-oriented woman named Eleanor Vance, who oversaw corporate strategy and had a reputation for bold, but well-researched moves. Getting to her was the final hurdle. I couldn't just email her cold. I needed an introduction, a way to bypass the layers of gatekeepers. I leveraged a contact I had made years ago during a complex cross-departmental project, someone who now worked in Vance's division. I was deliberately vague, asking for 10 minutes of their time to discuss a potential strategic initiative I believed had significant merit. I practiced my pitch obsessively, boiling down months of research into a concise, compelling argument. It had to be purely business. No emotion. No mention of sisters or husbands or whispered insults. Just data, strategy, and opportunity. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning. My heart hammered in my chest all weekend. David was oblivious, busy drafting his consulting contract with Clara's company. He was excited about his new letterhead. I was focused on the cold, hard reality of corporate warfare. The day of the meeting, I wore my most professional suit, the one I usually saved for annual reviews. I walked through the familiar corridors of my building, but they felt different, charged with a new significance. This wasn't just my workplace anymore. It was the launchpad for my potential future. I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration, like standing on the edge of a cliff. Vance's office was minimalist, high-tech, overlooking the city. She was sharp, Direct, no nonsense. I sat across from her polished desk, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I took a deep breath and began. I laid out the strategic landscape, identified the opportunity, presented the data points I had meticulously gathered. I explained the potential synergies, the financial implications, the competitive advantage acquiring Clara's company would give us. I spoke about their market presence, their innovative edge, and their operational weaknesses, the regulatory risk, the supply chain dependencies, the quiet vulnerabilities that my department's perspective had allowed me to see. I spoke for exactly 12 minutes. When I finished, the room was silent. Vance leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. I waited, my palms sweating. This was it. The moment of truth. She could shut me down, dismiss me, thank me for my time, and forget I ever existed. Or worse, she could see the personal connection, the potential for conflict of interest, the audacity of a procurement specialist proposing a major acquisition.
She didn't do any of that.
After a long moment, she simply said, "That's comprehensive." She tapped a pen against a file folder. "And you gathered all this data yourself?" "Yes, Ms. Vance," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Leveraging the resources available to my department and my understanding of operational structures." She nodded slowly. "Your analysis of their supply chain dependencies is particularly insightful. Most people looking at a tech startup would focus on IP and market share. You've seen the bedrock or lack thereof." A flicker of something passed across her face. Respect? Curiosity? She picked up my printed proposal. "This requires further review. And discretion." Significant discretion. She looked up, meeting my eyes. "Who else have you spoken to about this?" "No one within the company," I said. "Beyond the colleague who facilitated this introduction, who knows only that I had a strategic proposal." She held my gaze for another moment, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips.
"Good.
Keep it that way." She stood up. "I'll be in touch."
Dismissal?
Or something more. I couldn't tell. I walked out of her office feeling numb, the city lights outside her window blurring. I had done it. I had put the plan in motion. The die was cast. Weeks turned into months. Silence from Vance's office. I was back in my routine, the spreadsheets, the negotiations. But everything felt different now. Tainted with the possibility, the secret hope. David was deeply embedded in Clara's world now. He'd come home late sometimes, full of insider details about their strategy, their growth targets. He even talked about potentially taking a full-time executive role after the consulting gig. He was planning their future, oblivious that someone else was planning their takeover. The tension at home became unbearable. Every word he spoke about Clara's company felt like a taunt. Every time he dismissed my quiet life, it felt like a confirmation of his blindness. I avoided him, spending evenings alone in the spare room, pretending to work, but really just waiting. Waiting for the call, the email, the sign that my secret plan was moving forward. The uncertainty was a constant knot in my stomach. Had Vance dismissed it? Was it too audacious? Had I miscalculated? Then an email arrived. Subject line: Follow-up, strategic initiative. It was from Vance's executive assistant. A request for another meeting. Not in Vance's office this time, but a neutral conference room off-site. And not just with Vance. There were other names on the invite. Names I recognized from the very top of the corporate hierarchy. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. They were taking it seriously. The second meeting was even more intense. More people, sharper questions. I presented my case again, refining the points based on my internal monologues and hypothetical challenges over the past months. I spoke about market capitalization, asset valuation, integration strategies. I used the language of their world, the world of billions of dollars and global footprints. I could feel their skepticism, their careful analysis, but also a growing interest. They pushed back, asked hard questions about feasibility, risk, the potential for culture clashes. I had anticipated many of their points, drawing on my years of navigating complex corporate systems from the ground up. I knew the practical challenges of integrating disparate operations in a way that many high-level strategists might overlook. My seemingly mundane experience was, in fact, my greatest asset. The process wasn't swift or simple. It involved more meetings, due diligence teams, lawyers. I was brought into the inner circle, albeit a small, highly confidential one. I continued my regular job, a strange double life where I spent my days negotiating supply contracts for widgets and my evenings and weekends discussing multi-billion-dollar acquisition strategies with C-suite executives. I learned to compartmentalize, to build walls in my mind. David remained oblivious. He was too busy climbing his own ladder, built on his sister's scaffolding. The deepening crisis was the pressure of keeping the secret, the stress of knowing that everything I had worked for, everything I hoped for, hinged on the success of this incredibly risky venture. The knowledge that David and Clara were entirely unaware, living in their bubble of anticipated success, while I was the quiet force potentially about to burst it. There were moments of profound doubt. What if it all fell apart? What if they found out? What if I destroyed my career and my marriage for nothing? The isolation was immense. I couldn't talk to anyone. My life felt like a carefully constructed lie balanced on a knife edge. David's excitement about his new consulting role at Clara's company was a constant, grating reminder of what was at stake. He talked about their expansion plans with such confidence, such certainty in their continued upward trajectory. He was planning their victory party, completely unaware that I was planning their surrender. He even started bringing home materials, strategy decks from Clara's company, assuming I wouldn't understand them, leaving them carelessly on the kitchen counter while he took calls or went to the gym. I absorbed every detail, every number, every potential weakness accidentally revealed. His arrogance was my intelligence source. The regulatory deadline I had identified for Clara's company was approaching. It meant they would need significant capital outlay and operational restructuring to comply. It made the acquisition not just strategically sound, but timely. My company saw the window of opportunity. It added urgency to the negotiations. The process accelerated. Teams were assembled, NDAs were signed, lawyers drafted documents deep into the night. I wasn't leading the charge, not officially, but I was the quiet engine providing insights, flagging risks, validating data. My detailed knowledge, born of months of secret work, was invaluable. Then came the day. The final approvals were granted. The boards met. The deal was struck. It happened fast, a whirlwind of legal language, financial transfers, and press release drafts. My company, the steady, reliable, unglamorous manufacturing giant, was acquiring Clara's flashy, innovative tech startup. The official announcement was scheduled for a Monday morning. A press conference, simultaneous emails to employees at both companies. I was asked if I wanted to be there at the press conference. I declined. My part wasn't about the spotlight. It was about the quiet precision of the strike. I wanted to be at my desk, in my element, where the real work, the kind David dismissed, actually happened. Monday morning arrived with a strange, heavy quiet. The secret I had carried for so long was about to be released. I sat at my desk, the hum of the computers the only sound. I had my email open, waiting. My phone was silent. David was at his new consulting gig, likely settling into his corner office at Clara's company headquarters, feeling smug, successful, part of the future. The email landed at precisely 9 a.m. The subject line, important announcement regarding company future. I clicked it open. The standard corporate language. We are pleased to announce the acquisition. I scrolled down, past the quotes from our CEO, past the details of the transaction. My name wasn't mentioned, of course. I was a quiet force, not a public face.
My phone rang.
It was Clara. Her voice was tight, breathless. Did you see the email? Do you know about this? I just saw it, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Acquired? We're being acquired? By your company?
How?
Why? She sounded bewildered, blindsided. She hadn't seen it coming. The internal narrative at her company must have been all about their acquisitions, their growth, not the possibility of being consumed themselves. Strategic decision, I said simply. Based on market analysis and growth opportunities. Strategic? It's a shock.
No one here knew. She paused.
What does this mean? For my job?
For
everything. Integration plans are still being finalized, I said, repeating lines I had heard in countless meetings. But your company's innovation is a key asset. I imagine they'll want to retain key talent. I didn't offer false comfort.
This was her reality now.
It wasn't personal against her, not truly, but it was a direct consequence of the game that had been played. The line went silent for a moment. Then Clara said, her voice low, David. He's consulting for us now. He was just getting started.
I know, I said.
And that was all I said. I didn't need to elaborate. His future, the one he was so confidently building, tethered directly to her company, was now inextricably tied to my company. The company he saw as small, safe, and infinitely less important than hers. My office phone rang next. It was David. His voice was not just tight, it was ragged, filled with disbelief and something that sounded suspiciously like panic. What is this? He demanded, not bothering with a greeting. An email just went out. Our company, Clara's company, is being acquired by your company? Yes, I said, my voice calm.
How? Why?
I was just starting. I was going to be a consultant on their acquisitions. This is insane. How could they be acquired? They were flying high. He was practically shouting into the phone, his usual smooth demeanor completely gone. Strategic decision. I repeated, the words feeling strangely powerful this time. Our company saw an opportunity. Clara's company is strong in certain areas, but we have the operational infrastructure, the financial depth, and the long-term stability to make the combined entity even stronger. But you work in procurement. You wouldn't know about something like this. This is C-suite stuff. This is huge. His voice was rising, cracking. He was grasping for understanding, for a way to fit this reality into his neatly ordered view of the world, a world where I was small and he was on the rise. Yes, I said, a cold satisfaction spreading through me. It is huge. And I was involved. Silence. A stunned, gaping silence on the other end of the line. I imagined his face, the color draining from it, the dawning horror as the pieces clicked into place. The months of my quietness, my distance, my late nights that he dismissed as moping. My mundane job that he'd seen as a dead end. He saw it now. He saw the quiet work, the deep dive into data, the strategic analysis he never believed I was capable of. He saw the bedrock, the infrastructure, the sheer quiet power of the company he had underestimated. And he saw that the woman he had so casually dismissed as never being her had orchestrated a move that had just acquired the very ground he was standing on. You, he stammered, the word barely audible. You did this. I was part of the team, I said, choosing my words carefully. I identified the strategic opportunity. I built the initial case. I provided key insights throughout the process. It wasn't an exaggeration. It wasn't the whole story either, the years of quiet observation, the hurt, the cold determination. But it was enough. He didn't respond. I could hear his ragged breathing over the line. His carefully constructed world, the one where he was hitching his star to Clara's ascent, had just been vaporized by the woman he had left behind in the dust. His future, the one he was so excited about, was now dependent on the continued goodwill of my company. The irony was a bitter, potent wine. I have to go, he finally choked out. Goodbye, David, I said. And I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long moment, the hum of the office filling the silence. It wasn't the explosive confrontation I might have fantasized about in my darkest moments. It was quiet, clinical, devastatingly effective. He wasn't just blindsided. He was strategically outmaneuvered by someone he didn't even see as a player. He thought I was stuck trying to climb his sister's ladder. He never imagined I was building a different kind of power entirely. The aftermath wasn't a triumphant parade. It was quieter, more complex. My marriage to David ended swiftly and cleanly after that. There wasn't really anything left to fight over. He moved out. The house felt quiet, but this time it was a peaceful quiet, an empty canvas instead of a stifling cage. There was no grand, cathartic breakup speech. Just the quiet dismantling of a life built on uneven ground. He couldn't look at me. The humiliation was too profound. His last words to me weren't angry. They were simply, I never. I didn't know no, he hadn't. That was the point. My relationship with Clara was strained, but not broken. She was remarkably professional about the acquisition. She understood the business logic, painful as it was. We were forced into closer contact than we had been in years, navigating the integration process. We weren't suddenly best friends, but there was a grudging respect, maybe even a flicker of understanding. She saw that my quiet job hadn't meant I was small, and I saw that her brilliance didn't mean she was invincible. We were both just navigating a complex, often brutal world. My role in my company shifted. I was recognized, quietly, internally. I wasn't promoted to the C-suite overnight, but my expertise was valued, sought after. I was given more responsibility, more complex projects. I was no longer just a procurement specialist. I was a strategist, an analyst, someone who saw the whole board, not just a single square. The work was demanding but fulfilling. It felt like building something real, something solid, on my own terms. The victory wasn't sweet in a simple way. It was bittersweet. It had cost me my marriage, certainly. But that marriage had already died the night David whispered those words. The cost was the years I had spent underestimating myself, allowing someone else's narrow vision to define my potential. I stood, literally and figuratively, on different ground now. I had proven him wrong, yes. But more importantly, I had proven myself right. I wasn't her, and I didn't need to be. My strength lay in my own unique perspective, my own quiet persistence, my ability to see value and leverage where others saw only the mundane. The most powerful kind of success, I learned, isn't always the loudest or the flashiest. Sometimes, it's the one built silently, meticulously, from the ground up. And sometimes, the most devastating power is wielded not with a shout, but with a quiet, strategic move that leaves the people who underestimated you standing in the ruins of the world they were so sure was theirs. The quiet hum of my office, the steady rhythm of my new life, was the sound of a different kind of victory.
My own.
If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to redefine yourself after someone tried to put you in a box, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. Thanks for being here, for listening. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.